Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, former congressional staffer and D.C. area attorney, Sam Dewey.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, how are you doing this week, Sam?
I am hanging in there. It's been another crazy week in D.C., but what's new?
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much every week, I guess, is a crazy week in D.C. And before we start talking about this last crazy week, I do want to thank some new supporters. There's Dylan, also Hayden, a longtime Patreon supporter who took a brief break and who's now back with us again. And so we really do appreciate your support. Thank you very much. We always do put support links in the show notes. And so if you're not a supporter and you're maybe considering becoming one, we hope you will. There you go. All right. So, last week we talked about the uproar in some parts of MAGA world over the Trump administration's announcement that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide and that there's no Epstein client list to release. Now, last week, I thought this would fade away, but it kind of looks now like I might have underestimated the importance of, conspiracy theories in MAGA, maybe especially when they involve pedophilia. We'll get into that perhaps. But so far, at least, President Trump is continuing to support Attorney General Pam Bondi, as well as criticizing as weaklings those who are being, in his view, conned into believing a hoax perpetrated by Democrats. That said, he also said this week that Bondi should release, first he said whatever she thinks is credible, and then later in the week, is it a taco move? I don't know. But anyway, he posted on Truth Social, based on the ridiculous amount of publicity given to Jeffrey Epstein, I've asked Attorney General Pam Bondi to produce any and all pertinent grand jury testimony subject to court approval. Adding, this scam perpetrated by Democrats should end right now. Now, I'm guessing Donald Trump might have felt forced to do something, especially after this week a Wall Street Journal piece came out alleging that in 2003, Donald Trump gave Jeffrey Epstein a suggestive letter for Epstein's 50th birthday with a hand-drawn picture of a naked woman signed Donald where the pubic hair would be. Interesting. Now, Trump has furiously denied the letters from him, saying, in typical Trumpian fashion, I'm going to sue the Wall Street Journal just like I sued everyone else. And also, but wait, there's more. There's been an effort in Congress to release the so-called Epstein files. Republicans on the House Rules Committee recently voted down an amendment offered by Democrats that would have forced a floor vote on the release. But it's not just Democrats who are pushing this. Republican Thomas Massey is working with Democrat Ro Khanna to pull together the 218 signatures they would require for a successful discharge petition, which would bring the matter to the floor for a vote. And discharge petitions aren't super uncommon. You'll maybe see 5 to 10 filed per year, but almost none of them succeed. The failure rate's well over 90%. But if you're listening to Connie saying, we already have 6 Republicans, they expect to get all House Democrats, which would then put them over the top. But that said, even a successful vote to release all the Epstein information doesn't mean it will in fact be released, because Congress can't directly compel the Justice Department to release the results of an investigation to the public. So is it more than a messaging vote? I don't know. We'll talk about that. But all of this is likely to take a while because under House rules, Massey and Khanna can't start officially getting signatures for 7 legislative days. And with summer break coming up, that might actually push a vote into early to mid-September. And what will the leadership do here? I don't know. There's been some talk about maybe we'll schedule some kind of a vote. To me, it smacks of sort of delaying tactics, hoping this will go away. But I'm not the MAGA guy. I'm not the person who can speak to this. I think, Sam, you can certainly speak a lot more to what's going on in the MAGA world about this. And what do you think about this controversy that is not seem to be going away?
So I think to kind of understand where all this is coming from, you have to take a step back and start at the highest levels. There is a lot of distrust of government in the MAGA community based on episodes that we know about where the government engaged in conduct that was not appropriate and was misleading. Just look at the report that came out yesterday from ODNI about how the intelligence apparatus was weaponized against President Trump by Biden and Obama officials in 2016. So if you look at that, well, what's going on? Where are we? You have a profound distrust. You have we can't trust apparatus of government in politically sensitive cases. And the only way to respond to that really is transparency. And that's what the base has been repeatedly promised in all of these cases. And the base hasn't gotten that. And that's why the base is so furious. And that's why the base is, for lack of a better way to put it, freaking out over all of this. They're saying, wait a second, our whole thing is we can't trust government, the deep state, etc. And the solution to that right now is transparency. And one of the things that was talked about on the campaign as being something where you needed transparency, where it was the Epstein situation, that was talked about by everyone on the campaign. So the base expected transparency there. And I just want to say, I think the term conspiracy theory can have a couple of different meanings. It can be your tinfoil hat, the aliens coming, or it can be something that I think is rational, and the use of the term conspiracy theory may be inappropriate because you're almost taking away the rationality. And what I'm talking about is to say, look, I don't know that something bad happened, but there may be reasons that something bad could happen, and I just don't trust the government. So until we get public disclosure, we're going to be skeptical. And if the government is fighting public disclosure, we're going to draw an inference from that and say that probably means something bad did happen. And I don't really argue about whether or not that's appropriate, but I don't think that's a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. That's a theory grounded in reality. So I think it's tough to use that nomenclature. I like to get away from that and say, conspiracy is tinfoil hat. This is a, theory. Yeah. Misfeasance through failure to disclosure, concerns from failure to disclosure, something like that. So you have kind of that. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, that's an interesting distinction because you're right. I mean, conspiracy theory, just by there's nothing inherently in it that means it's insane, but we've taken that to mean some kind of irrational tinfoil. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I actually, in this case, I don't really mean it in a pejorative. I guess I don't really mean it in a pejorative sense because it sure does seem to track. It's not like Jewish space lasers or, whatever kind of weird stuff some people have talked about. This is actually, a guy who was in for some pretty serious crimes, might have had, but certainly was a friend of a lot of influential and powerful people, including several U.S. presidents, and mysteriously commit suicide in prison before this can go to trial. I mean, that doesn't seem tinfoil hatty at all. That just seems like a episode of Law and Order or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, and exactly. So, and I think most people get that. I just wanted to make that.
Yeah, no,
because I think the nomenclature, but you just have a profound concern and you have an expectation that there's going to be disclosure. And then you have statements by the Attorney General that implied that there was a client list, that it was on her desk, that they were going to disclose everything. And then you get the binder of the flight logs, almost all of which was already public. So you have just a massive deflation there. Then you have the statement, I've got it on my desk, I'm reviewing it, everybody's reviewing it. And fast forward, and you have a tape that they have now admitted has a weird time gap just due to how the system works, but they released it without flagging that, which is just, to my mind, an astonishing failure of prep and staff work. You should obviously, when you release it, say, hey, all you people that don't trust us, here's why there's going to be a minute lag, and here's a statement explaining that and supporting it. You don't release it, then get hit, then release that. And then when you release a 2-page memo, however well-intentioned, and you don't release the documents, you don't get into a lot of the details in a situation like this where we're dealing with a case that's one of extraordinary concern for a lot of people. You're just not going to get home. You're not going to get around the concern about transparency without releasing a longer memo, without releasing some documents. Now, in some cases, there'll be national security concerns. There's been no information released. If there is a release that says, yeah, no one was covering anything up, we just hadn't talked about it. Now we're talking about it and we're saying, yes, this bad thing did happen. And no one covered it up. We just didn't talk about it because the other side said it was secret, et cetera. And overclassification was the cover up. Okay, you may be able to get away with a memo. I think a lot of people would understand that and appreciate that, but not something like the Epstein. And my view was from as soon as this started, 100%, this is not going to go away. This is going to be an issue.
Yeah, I guess I wonder what the thinking was in that initial release, because there was all this. It was a big deal when they had the people with the influencers, with the pundits, with the binders, right? Epstein files, phase 1, and it was just a bunch of warmed over nothing, essentially. But at that point, if they didn't know what was in all that and they released something with phase 1 on it, that seems to me to be either incompetence. Well, I don't know what else could be aside from incompetence, honestly. I'm kind of can you help me out here? What was the thinking that I've got this on? I mean, it just seemed like they were setting everyone up for this huge second release and then nothing. They had to know are they that clueless about their base, or I just don't get it. It just seems like a huge unforced error here.
You're right. Yeah, I think it was an unforced error. I don't think there's any other way to look at it. I think it's unfortunate because I think there are a lot of, very well-meaning people working on it, including the president, who is, I think, rightly frustrated. How did this get so off the rails? I'm trying to provide transparency, what happened, and understandably wants to move on to what I'll call affirmative forward-looking matters of implementing his forward-looking agenda. But I think that it's completely predictable and understandable. And I think part of the reason the president reacted the way he did was it wasn't briefed up to him that this could likely happen. I think he thought that it was dealt with. And then it's like, why is it back? What's going on? And no one told him, sir, no, this is not dealt with. Our initial release was a little ham-handed. It's going to keep coming back. I sensed a little bit of that in his truth, just the level of annoyance.
Do you think it's an issue where he's now at the point where he's surrounded himself with so many people who are either temperamentally or just for fear of, some kind of reprisal or anger, just are not willing to tell him certain hard truths?
No, because in plenty of areas, I think you do get hard truths being told. I think just this is one that was just mismanaged. That happens in any administration, and it's kind of unfortunate it happened on this issue because this was an issue where the base isn't going to let go, because the base was promised transparency. This is a huge issue for them. Trump ran on, we have to have transparency because we can't trust the deep state. So there's a clear political disconnect there on a core belief of the base. And my perspective on the whole thing is, mistakes were made somewhere in the administration, and it's just unfortunate. And I wish that there was a way to just put it all to bed, because I don't think anybody's acting maliciously. I don't think anybody's acting out of any of the theories that, Trump was actually trying to hide it, actually trying to suppress it, et cetera. I mean, let's remember, and we'll get into this on the other story, when he found out, the first round of charges came out, he threw Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago and banned him. And there's a real difference between, a little locker room behavior with the lads and trafficking in underage women.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a difference beyond a legal difference. I mean, there's a legal difference, and then there's just I'm not endorsing this phrase at all, but kind of a, boys will be boys, locker room culture, particularly back then in the 90s. I mean, that was how things worked. It wasn't just him, it was Clinton, it was others. And I think there's a big difference between, locker room back and forth and what the president did when it came out. He pretty immediately, out of all the people who had interacted with Epstein, said, I want nothing to do with you. You're banned from my clubs. Don't talk to me. But I think he has a pretty clear divide on that of, back when he was a private citizen in private life, boys will be boys. We've all heard the recordings. That's that. But there's a huge difference between that and criminal conduct, particularly criminal conduct that exploits kids.
And I guess at this point, I feel like the well has been so poisoned now that nothing is going to satisfy the base on this, because unless they release an actual client list with names and a bunch of salacious details, which is not going to happen, I think they're still going to be saying, well, clearly it's a cover up, because you can't really come back from that sort of thing. And so they're stuck.
Yeah. I mean, I think to some extent they are stuck. I think that it was just, and that, I mean, the statement by the Attorney General, it's on my desk, which she's been engaging in verbal gymnastics to walk back. I mean, that's everybody misspeaks, no judgment there, but I mean, it was said in a way that everybody understood to mean there's going to be a part two. She actually has the client list. That was the context. And if it was you misspoke, you back brief that, you clarify it, you have your staff clean it up, and everybody misspeaks, that's fine. But generally speaking, if a principal misspeaks, a staffer, and the principal is, willing to take advice from staff, a staffer is going to say, ma'am, it sounded like you were saying you have the client list on the desk. I'm not aware of that. Do we?
Right.
Oh no, I've got to go clarify this. I misspoke. I'm very sorry. And I think that, and that happens in everything. Like, and if you just deal with it, you move along. Like every lawyer's had the situation where they confuse a case at argument, or they confuse a judge that wrote the case. And it's, oh my God, how could I miss that? I read the thing 5 times, and no big deal. You just write a letter. You either correct it if you get a note from the guy behind you, your junior, later on, or you just send a letter to the court saying, hey, I'm very sorry, I confused Judge Maida with Judge Howe. Here are the citations, and you pick up credibility doing that. So it's not to say that mistakes don't happen. It's not to say that it might not have just completely been Attorney General misspeaking. The real question is, why didn't she or her staff pick it up and back brief it to say, okay, here's the situation. I mean, I think it'll be interesting. We now have the petition filed to unseal the grand jury materials. It'll be particularly interesting because that docket is publicly identified. You may get press intervening to argue, no, more should be released than the Department of Justice wants to be released or than the court's releasing. I'm not exactly sure what'll be in there that'll go directly to the point. And it may not be comprehensive. We'll see. I do think that also it's kind of odd if some of the material was 60. Why didn't they say that up front?
So you do think that that judge will allow for a significant amount of the grand jury material to be, because I know that that's not a common thing, but you're thinking the public interest here is strong enough where the judge will be convinced to allow as much as can be released, I'm sure with plenty of redactions, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think what the judge is going to say is, okay, we've got to, the investigation is closed. Nothing else is going on. We've got to release something. Obviously, there are going to be redactions just for privacy reasons for people who aren't, implicated, et cetera. But I think at the same time, the judge is going to say we can release a lot of this because it does go directly to.
I guess to me, the idea, I don't know if this is what people on the right are thinking. Some people, certainly not you, but that Donald Trump is somehow protecting himself. I just can't get over the stumbling block of if Donald Trump were in fact directly or even, indirectly implicated in this in some files or something. I just can't imagine that someone in the Biden administration wouldn't have found that and leaked that. That just seems incomprehensible to me.
Yeah, I mean, kind of moving on to this whole Trump memo thing. Look, if there was anything actually damaging in there, it would have been released long ago. Long ago. They would have released it. They would have made something to do out of it. They would have found a way to get it out. There's no way that wouldn't have happened. And there is absolutely no way that it wouldn't have been deployed in an extremely damaging way.
That's exactly how I think. But I guess in part, it doesn't necessarily have to be about Donald Trump. It's also this, when I mentioned that sort of jokingly, but not really, when I said, well, it's not just a conspiracy, but it involves pedophilia. And I'm actually serious about that because that is kind of a bigger deal in certain parts of the right. There's a whole QAnon thing and so forth, right? That I think a lot of folks maybe who aren't don't follow that sort of thing, don't really get what a big deal that is.
So I think to some extent that's true. I wouldn't overestimate that influence.
So you don't think the QAnon sort of, because for folks who forget it, but the QAnon thing with the cabal of global elites are running this massive child sex trafficking ring in their downtime from running the rest of the world, anyway, but not my theory.
No, I don't think so.
But you agree, right, that that's part of what maybe makes this particularly salient for some folks, at least, who are upset about this.
For some, sure. I think for the majority, it's that bigger transparency issue. And again, I think you're absolutely right that there is just no way you wouldn't have had a release under Biden if there was anything truly damaging to the president.
Yeah, because even if it was damaging to the president and a bunch of other people, there are ways to selectively leak certain things to let that out and to protect the folks that you want to protect, essentially. And so that's why I just see this as kind of a non-starter in terms of the argument that Trump is directly involved. But one thing I hadn't asked you about, I'm curious about this. As I said, Donald Trump has been very strong in his support for the attorney general. Maybe she doesn't lose her job. Maybe she does. But do you think, does anyone lose their job over this?
Not sure. I'm just not sure. I think it's possible. I think it's very possible, particularly if this goes on. And we'll see. I mean, we'll see. It could. Yeah, someone definitely could, but I think it's just a matter of we'll see.
And you don't think this is going to go away in like a week or two?
I don't see it going away in a week or two, absent, more significant disclosures, just for the reason I identified. And, I also think it's unfortunate that the president has now sued the Wall Street Journal. Not saying that wasn't justified on his part. I don't know the specific facts there, but I think that'll fan the flames a bit, and that'll be a problem. And I don't necessarily think anything will come of it, just because of the way that New York Times versus Sullivan makes it almost impossible to succeed against a news outlet. So I think you're going to see a lot of difficulty in that case. Now, again, I haven't seen the evidence, so I'm not claiming one way or another. I'm just saying that those cases are extraordinarily hard to win. And I think it's unfortunate that may lead some people to kind of continue the view of, yes, there is a conspiracy here. Why is the president suing? What's going on? Even though the answer to that is quite obvious. He's suing because he thinks this story is false. He's mad. But again, as I said earlier, even if he wrote the thing, which he has denied, I mean, there's a big difference between stupidity amongst
Sure. Locker room thing. Yeah, I get. Yeah,
locker rooms, a bunch of finance guys engaging in locker room talk. I mean, watching, to this day, watch like Billions on HBO. Like, that's mild compared to what a lot of places still get up to. And I'm not defending that, but I think there's a big difference between locker room talk in that context and, actually, he's, trafficking underage women. And I think you get a very different reaction. And that's when you get Trump severing all ties and actually banning him from all his clubs. He publicly threw him out of Mar-a-Lago. And I will say in passing, you don't get other people severing ties with him for much longer. So that's that.
I get the sense that the whole discharge petition thing, as I mentioned, I'm very skeptical about that. It almost never happens, right, successfully. And I think in part, if leadership thinks that it's going to potentially succeed, they'll just craft some kind of compromise with the few of the Republicans who are signing on to that, and something will be released, and so they don't suffer the embarrassment of that. At least that's my take on that part of it. What do you think?
I think that's exactly right. And I think that's why you saw Speaker Johnson making a statement that there should be additional transparency. He knows there's a risk because there are a lot of members who are extremely pro-transparency who are, I think, very frustrated by this. So he's heading it off by saying there should be more transparency, sending signals. And I think is hopeful that at least in the near term, people are going to say, okay, let's wait and see what DOJ is going to release, what the judge says you can release, and then we'll reevaluate.
And it occurs to me also that the President Trump, one of the things he's been saying again and again is that this is a Democrat hoax. And yet most of the people who are really pushing this are not, in fact, Democrats. They're actually people who are ostensibly Trump supporters or were. I mean, certainly you look at Elon Musk, who's just made it like his cause of the last couple of weeks on X. And of course, starting with that post that he took down about how Trump's actually in the Epstein files. And so this is really not, I mean, that's where I think Donald Trump is wrong. And he knows I get what he's doing to try to make it politically. Oh, look at these evil people on the left who are going after me. But really, it's his own side that's going after him. And that to me is sort of the not really ironic part, but another interesting aspect of this.
So I'm not necessarily shy. I think there are two ways to read what he's saying. And I think the Democratic hoax part that he's really mad about is, one, all of a sudden the Democrats are expressing interest. They didn't express any interest for years. And two, they're all kind of clamoring along the lines with Elon, Trump's in the files. And I think that's what he's most mad about. Saying this is, A, they didn't care about this issue because all of their people were in it until it was politically expedient. And two, all this chatter that I'm in the files is crap because I've said I knew him. I said I socialized with him. And then as soon as I found out, I kicked him out of all the clubs and that I owned that he liked to go to because he did frequent Mar-a-Lago, Epstein. I kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. I cut off contact, asked Bill Clinton if he did that.
I think
that's the frustration that the president is expressing of y'all had no interest in this until it was politically expedient for you because it was going to be more damaging to your party after it came out what was going on. And in any event, I've already spoken about this and the kind of hoax aspect of let's fuel rumors that they're withholding files because it has President Trump's name in it is what has him so furious.
Now, of course, nothing that Donald Trump himself hasn't done when the opportunity presented a million times, but it stings a little bit more when it's being done to you as opposed to being done by you on this. So anyway, any other thoughts on Epstein files before we move on?
I just think it's not going to go away. That's just the nature of how it is in the political calculus, and we'll see where we are in a couple of weeks. But, I think the bottom line is that there's going to need to be more transparency, and hopefully the administration will provide that.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso Virtuo Coffee Machines. Ready to enjoy the bold flavors of barista-quality Nespresso iced coffee at home? Simply fill a glass with ice and press the brew button on your Virtuo Pop machine to enjoy rich double espressos roasted to stand up even when chilled. Refreshingly bold iced coffee. Refreshingly easy to make at home. Visit Nespresso.com to shop now.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
All right, well, let's move on to something very different. You know, we're generally here very happy to get into the weeds on legislation and on public policy, and we've been doing this for a while, but I don't actually know that we've ever discussed a rescissions bill. That's a bill that allows for cuts to previously approved government spending. And for those who aren't familiar with that, this became a thing after the Impoundment Control Act in 1974 that gave the president the ability to, among other things, request rescission subject to congressional approval. And it's pretty uncommon. In the last 30 years, there have been only, by my count, 3 standalone presidential rescission requests. There was a minor one from Bill Clinton, like $17 million or something. And then 2 big ones from President Trump, one in 2018 for $14.8 billion. That passed the House and failed the Senate. And then the current one, the one that was actually approved, $9.4 billion or so, that was approved by both chambers this week. And the reason why it had to happen this week is that under the law, Congress has 45 days to consider the president's requests. And if they're not approved, then the money has to be spent. Well, that 45 days ran out yesterday on Friday. We're recording this Saturday morning. Now, most of these funds, around $8 billion or so, were going to be spent on foreign assistance programs, with the remainder, a little bit over $1 billion, having gone to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which supports NPR and PBS. It was a pretty close vote in the Senate, 51-48. And to convince some Senate Republicans who were wavering a little bit, the administration agreed to drop a request to cut around $400 million from the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief. And congressional Republicans, as you would expect, were not happy about these rescissions. They argued that this represents an unacceptable level, I guess you could say, of presidential interference in government funding, which, of course, is the purview of Congress. So, Sam, what do you think about this unusual, at least by historical standards, rescissions package?
I mean, I think it shows that the DOGE effort of cutting back on government spending and getting serious about that is underway. And that's why we've seen a historically large rescissions package, because they took a close look at the budget and said, this is a bunch of spending that we don't need, and we need to stop it, and we need to just really change how we think about government spending. So that's what we've done, and that's what passed. And I think it's pretty good that they got that passed, because that was unnecessary spending, and it's a good thing to get rid of it.
And presumably we won't necessarily see further packages, or may not, but I'm thinking that given that this is clawing back money that was passed I believe in the last Biden era budget, presumably in the future, the House and the Senate, both controlled by Republicans at this point, will make sure that none of those things go into the budget in the first place, right?
Yes. And I think that that's where the fight is going to move. This is backward looking.
And you know, it's not, I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's not, right? In the context of the federal budget, $9.4 billion, and that's, you know, couch cushion sort of change. And also, it's not actually going to crush public radio. I mean, federal funding for public radio, public broadcasting through the corporation makes up somewhere around 6% of NPR station funding. PBS, a little more dependent, around 15% or so. But yeah, I think you could actually make a case that this is better for NPR and PBS to not have that, so they can kind of just do what they want and not have to deal with this hanging over their head the whole time. I don't know. What do you think about that argument?
Probably right. I do think part of this, though, is definitely they're just not happy really not happy that PBS is getting any federal funding because of the political view that they take and the political bias that is inherent. I think that's perfectly fair and appropriate to push back on that. So I think generally you're right. As the dollar amount, in one sense, yeah, it's not that much. Let's not kid ourselves in light of the federal budget. However, I think there is pretty clear variation, et cetera. And it is important in terms of the relative dollar amount that we are going from a situation where it would just be unheard of to have no rescissions, none of that, no callbacks, get a couple $1 million here and there to a, it's billions, but as the saying goes, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, you're talking about real money. So I think it's one rescission package. The amount is not massive, but when you think about it in that broader context, it is very significant.
I wonder, though, if in some sense it's almost like an insult to the Thomas Massey, Rand Paul types, where it's like your house is burning down and they hand you this water pistol and say, well, there you go. You squirt a couple times. And because it seems like that they're just essentially ignored, by almost everyone now and say, oh, well, because it's not like, I mean, you're right. Obviously, you add up enough billions and eventually you get to real money. But we all know that you don't get the real money in the budget unless you cut defense and entitlement programs. And there seems to be no appetite for that. If I were like a Thomas Massey, this would just drive me nuts. It just feel like a fake sort of to distract people. Oh, yes, we're fiscally responsible. Look at all this stuff we're cutting. And yet he knows, and everyone knows, that that's not the real problem.
Yes, but I think it is a step in the right direction.
So
I think it's an indication. We're doing this. We're going to keep working through other stuff. We're going to work through other things in the budget process as we go through that. I think it's maybe a down payment. That might not be the right analogy, but something like that. I do think it is enough dollar-wise to make it significant. Therefore, it is a down payment.
See, I wonder if it's as much about budget cutting as it is about messaging, kind of what we like and what we don't policy-wise. Because pretty clear for generations now at this point, public broadcasting and conservatives doesn't go well together, right? But the biggest part of these cuts weren't to that. That's get a lot of the press, but to foreign assistance program. And that's part of pretty clearly a much larger initiative on the part of the Trump administration to stop or to really pull back on a lot of that stuff. And I get the sense, this may sound weird, but I don't even know if Donald Trump and the main people surrounding him even believe in the concept of soft power. I don't know if they think it's a thing. What do you think?
No, I don't think that's accurate.
Okay.
I do think there are plenty of instances in which people believe in soft power. Just think that they think the things that they are cutting are just beyond the pale. They're not worth reforming, and that it's just a complete political disaster, and that they play for one side. And I think that may make it an easier cut in one sense because you're killing two birds with one stone. But I don't think it diminishes the cut, and I don't think it diminishes the political analysis there, which is very much more focused on you completely play for the other team. This is inappropriate, etc.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a broader attack on soft power. I think it's you specifically of being abusive and played for one team. Therefore, you shouldn't get public funding. And I don't think that says anything about think of soft power context where people are using it appropriately, where you aren't just playing for one team, etc.
I think I can understand that argument and even accept it to a certain extent when it comes to NPR and PBS, because I mean, I've listened, well, not so much PBS, but certainly plenty of NPR in my time. And I get that argument for that, but it seems like the foreign assistance stuff, I don't know that that's really ideologically helps out the left or anything. And again, that was the biggest chunk of this, like $9.4 billion. And so, again, it seems to me that they just want to cut something. And if you're going to cut from somewhere, it's maybe the thinking, I don't know, is better to cut from money that's going to foreign assistance than any money that's going to the U.S. That would seem to fit with the America First sort of thing. I tend to think it's a little short-sighted, but I guess I get that sort of logic.
Yeah. I wouldn't put it quite in that level of dislike of assistance across the board, but I understand what you're saying.
Got it. Okay. Any other thoughts on this unusual rescissions bill?
I mean, I think we'll just see where it goes, but I do think it is significant just because it's not a million here, a million there. It's a billion here, a billion there. And I think it's part of an ongoing effort.
Yeah. And what do you say to folks like, like Elon Musk and Thomas Massey and so forth to say, listen, hey, even if you're cutting 9.4 billion here, you just passed a big, beautiful bill that blows up the federal, deficit. We're talking, if you're cutting billions and you're taking in trillions less, that math definitely doesn't work out.
That's true to a point, but I think you're operating in the field of political realities and short-term versus long-term projections. And I think it's very significant within all of that.
All right. Well, let's move on to something a little bit different, the Supreme Court, because on Monday, they stayed a lower court's order that would have required the Department of Education reinstate just shy of 1,400 employees that were fired earlier this year. And as typical for granting, or for that matter, denying stays, the opinion was brief and unsigned. Though the court's 3 liberals joined in a dissent that was authored by Justice Sotomayor, that she wrote that the majority on the court is either willfully blind to the implications of its rulings or naive. But either way, the threat to our Constitution's separation of powers is grave. Now, the district judge who issued the injunction, Myung John, a Biden appointee, also temporarily prevented the administration from moving the department's responsibilities for special needs students as well as the federal student loan portfolio to Health and Human Services and the Small Business Administration, respectively. The Supreme Court stay also puts a stop to that as well. Now, the reasoning behind the injunction in the first place the district court judge gave is that the mass firings and reorganization serve to, at least in the eyes of Judge Wan, make it effectively impossible for the department to carry out its legal obligations. And this logic persuaded Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, but not the court's 6 conservatives. So, Sam, let's start with the majority again. We don't have any reasoning from them, but I'm guessing you have some thoughts as to why they ruled the way they did.
Yeah, I mean, the quote-unquote obligations of the department are written incredibly broadly and involve a ton of discretion. And I think it's a bit rich for the 3 liberals who had no problem with reading discretion into very mandatory test statutes, like in the immigration context, shall detain. Liberal jurists had no problem doing that there's this rush to, oh my God, core functions of the department. There's really not that much that they are mandated to do. Almost everything is discretionary in some sense. They're guiding principles, but when you have discretion how you apply those principles, there's a vast realm of different ways that you can do it that aren't on their face unreasonable. And it's just a hard case to win to say you have this agency that has very high-level goals and high-level instructions, lots of discretion on how to carry that out, and they're just not doing what they're required to do. Because the easy response is, what do you mean? This is written in the highest, broadest language about what they actually have to do. There's vast discretion to do this. With the prior administration, we saw a bunch of people saying, even specific mandatory language is not actually mandatory. How are we here? What is going on? And I think you have a lot of frustration about that kind of flippant logic, and I think it's fully appropriate to say where there actually is, because there actually is in this case, highly discretionary language, then the government has a vast amount of discretion in how to carry out its roles. And you can discharge the core functions of an agency without that agency doing, in most cases, a lot of what it previously did. And that's an important point to remember, that you can have an agency that does a lot of stuff that is discretionary. And when there's a change in government, that happens, and that's normal anywhere. Now, you're talking about a very dramatic change, but that's still within the discretion. So it's not surprising at all that the response of the majority of the court was, this is highly discretionary. There is discretion to do this. And essentially, we're going to do what Congress tells us. Congress told us here to give vast discretion, and, go, but if people don't like it, then go ahead and pass the law.
I agree with a lot of that, but here are a couple of things that I have problems with, where I'm inclined to agree with the three dissenters here. I guess first off is that it seems to me, as I read it, some of the firings, not all of them probably, but some of them seem to me to almost certainly be in violation of the law. Title 20, Section 3473 of U.S. Code says that the Secretary of Education can't eliminate offices in the department, offices that were established by law without 90 days notice given to the appropriate House and Senate committees. They're supposed to explain the actions and the rationale. Well, Secretary McMahon okayed the RIF on March 11th. That was only 50 days after Donald Trump was sworn in, only 8 days after she was sworn in as Secretary of Education. So it seems to me on the face of it, for at least some of those firings or some of those reorganizations where they ended entire departments, well, that seems to me to be a pretty clear legal violation. I don't know how one ignores that. Maybe I'm misreading it, but it seems pretty plain to me here. Thoughts?
Yeah, two responses. The first is, some of these are just in the vein of a firing, and that, I think the court has been pretty clear, you can't restrict the president's right to fire. And if a statute says you have to give notice before you fire, maybe there's a remedy within the kind of civil service system, but the court has been pretty clear that you're not going to get an injunction. You're not going to get judicial action on that. As to the firing, as to the abolition of the offices, I think you have a similar argument that a notification requirement of reorganization of an office comes somewhat into murky constitutional territory, but let's spot that. I think there is also a dispute on what actually happened in the reorg and whether or not they actually did that.
Let me ask it this way, I guess. So the part where I agree with you is that any president has wide discretion in terms of hiring and firing practice. I mean, within, the bounds of law, obviously, and reorganization. But we know it is clear that Donald Trump wants the Department of Education shut down. The reason I say this is because in an executive order, he directed Secretary McMahon to shut it down to the maximum extent appropriate and permitted by law. So we know that, when you say in an executive order, facilitate the closure of the Department of Education, that's not a coded message there, right? And so I guess here's my question. Right now, before Donald Trump took office the second time, around 4,200 people were working at the Department of Education. Now the figure is about half that. And so if a 50% workforce reduction is not enough to say, well, this is clearly the president acting to shut down, in effect, an agency, getting around congressional creation and authorization of this agency. Let's say that, just hypothetically, let's say that Donald Trump directed Secretary McMahon to fire every employee that she could possibly fire. Would that be, you see what I'm saying? Is there a point at which presidential reorganization and efficiency measures move from being that to being very clearly, in effect, just shutting down an agency that has been created and funded by Congress, which would create pretty significant separation of powers issues, I would think?
Yes, at the limits, no dispute there. I think the critical phrase in the order, though, is to the maximum extent permitted by law. And if the president wants to push what the law allows, that's fine. And then I'd also say, even if we kind of go beyond that, I do think there are some procedural issues that are in play regarding where these challenges should go. Do the people bringing the lawsuit do the states have standing? I think there are also those issues. I was just kind of jumped in on the merits, but there are some real procedural issues with this lawsuit because you have a lot of various questions about, well, wait, how are the states suing over this? Is there an actual injury in light of the some of the cases that came down? So that's also in play. And we don't know what the majority thought because it's just a short order, but it could be that some of them thought, okay, there's no issue on the merits, and others thought, well, I might have a question if the merits came up through another procedural vehicle, but this procedural vehicle or this case just isn't right on standing grounds. You could have a mixture.
The other issue that the senators brought up, not just the statutory thing that I raised, another argument they made was that the RIF, the reorganization and firings, were also constitutionally invalid. Now, to me, that case is a little bit weaker. My understanding is that the basis of it, the logic is that, again, if you cut and reorganize an agency to the point where you are doing that with an intent that it cannot carry out its functions, that's where that crosses the line. That's my whole, if you fired everyone in the agency example, for instance. And from my understanding, what a lot of the litigants are arguing is that, well, the Department of Education has already been cut to such a point that there have been large, long delays, weeks, months delays in reimbursement and approval for things that has created a concrete harm to these institutions, and that creates the standing to sue there. And that also is the argument that, well, the agency is now incapable of fulfilling its duties. I find that, I guess, compelling on the standing argument. I find it less compelling on the separation of powers, because I would need a lot more evidence aside from just some sort of potentially isolated incidents in which the department has been worse at doing certain things, losing those employees. Any thoughts on either of those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the standing analysis is actually a lot harder because it does, to a certain extent, merge with the merits on those questions. But I mean, more broadly, I think we're in agreement. I don't think even the administration is disputing that there is some limit to where they can go. It's just not here. And that's why they put the language in the order to the maximum extent permitted by the law. You know, he's not purporting, contrary to some of the rhetoric that's being discussed, the president is deliberately, disregarding the law. They're going up to what the law allows. And maybe, if a mistake is made, well, fine, that's a mistake, but that's not, some malicious intent. I think that rhetoric is just wrong and to a certain extent dangerous to have.
Well, I mean, I think the argument, and this was in a different dissent that I want to say Justice Sotomayor, I could be wrong about that, wrote last week or the week before, essentially saying you don't get to putting to the maximum extent allowable by law is not a get out of jail free card, if you will. You don't get to just put that in your executive order. But if what you're actually doing in practice is past the maximum extent, and I guess this is where it gets a little hazy to me, because I don't think there's any law that says you can't fire everyone in the Department of Education who, could potentially be fired or reassigned or something like that. But yet everyone seems to agree, or you and I seem to agree, and we're the people who count here in this conversation, that the president or the secretary of education couldn't just get rid of all the employees, and they couldn't just take all the offices and just give them to other cabinet departments. And so it's not okay, but yet there's nothing specifically in the law that says that. So it seems like it's more a principle rather than anything you can point to in the U.S. Code. Or am I missing something here?
No, I think the principle relies on the statutory duties of the agency. So it flows from that there are certain things that they have to do, and it's accepted at some level. Congress consent that. It's just, how do you interpret that principle? Not sure.
Gotcha. So then you think that, let's say that if firings or reorganizations were carried out to such an extent that, I don't know, the majority of schools were waiting, 4, 5, 6 months to get approval for things that took like weeks before, then there might actually be grounds to say, well, wait a second, this is all of a sudden a serious separation of powers type of issue?
Yeah, if it was a statutory function that had to be done in a certain way and in a certain time, sure. And I understand, yes, I take the point that putting that language in is not a get out of jail free card. But on the other hand, there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm going to do this to the maximum extent allowed by law. And that's not malicious. That's actually being transparent about what, the prior administration, I think, went well beyond the law, but it allowed an invasion, an illegal immigration invasion by construction, and they weren't transparent about it. They didn't admit what they were doing at all. So I think, in some levels saying, yeah, this is my view, I'm going to go to the maximum extent I can under the law is actually a bit salutary because it's transparency about what's going on.
Well, I think that about brings us to the end of this episode. And as always, if we said anything that you disagreed with or that you just thought was just incredibly awesome and wise, that could happen occasionally, or you just maybe have a question for us, we would love to hear from you. There are a bunch of ways you can get in touch. There's our email, mail@politicsguys.com, Facebook or X as well. We always put links in the show notes, and our Discord discussion forum for supporters. I am on that all the time, probably more than I should be anyway, but so we would really love to hear from you. And of course, the Discord thing is open to our supporters. There's other stuff available to supporters at different levels as well. And more important than that, it's supporters through Patreon, through PayPal, through Venmo. That's how we keep this show going. We rely on that, and we thank you very much. If you're not a supporter, we hope you will consider that. I always put links in the show notes. You get that free, or you get the full midweek episodes as opposed to just that like 10, 15-minute kind of snippet, and you get ad-free versions of everything. We put up a bunch of good stuff. I'd like to think so anyway. Hope you check it out. Again, links in the show notes. But if you would like to get that full midweek episode and you're not financially in a position to support us right now, that's not a problem. Just send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will make sure you get the full midweek episode every single week. And whether you're a supporter or not, it really does help us out a lot if you subscribe, rate and review us on whatever app you're listening on, as well as sharing episodes on social media. And finally, before we go, a very special thanks to our fantastic executive producers. They are Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, and Brian Matza. We'll be back with a new episode for you next week. We hope you'll join us.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,